There was a crowd of passengers at the entrance. They didn't realize that their commotion was only making the situation more complicated. It added to the difficulties and the desire of some, especially the more energetic citizens, to push their luggage through the heads of less energetic ones. Beto was watching the chaos from the driver's cabin for about 5 minutes, but then decided it was time to take radical measures. Clearing his throat, he barked loudly, causing the rows of people storming the vehicle to flinch. "Everyone, move away from the door to a safe distance. Otherwise, the bus won't go anywhere today." An elderly lady blocking the first step screamed desperately. "How is it? I need to get home urgently. My pig is about to give birth." Someone from the street called out cheerfully. "There she goes, lying without blushing. Marina, you've never even had pigs in your life. You can't even take care of chickens. What's it to you, you lousy drunk? Even though I'm a drunk, at least I'm honest. You're the one selling rotten eggs at the market." The old lady swung her bag at the troublemaker, but the projectile suddenly slipped from her weak strategic grip and landed on the head of an intellectual-looking man. Startled by the unexpected hit, the victim cursed inappropriately, which didn't match his respectable appearance. Beto barked again. "Everyone, if you don't calm down, I'll have to call the police." The bus driver's call had an effect, and the crowd quieted down a bit. The door of the old bus closed with a hiss, and those left outside pounded it with their fists. The driver took out his mobile phone and dialed the dispatcher. "Tina, tell Laura to come over, or someone else from the available controllers. My village has started another riot. And it's the same thing every time. I asked them to calm down, but they don't get it." In less than a minute, Laura appeared on the 4th platform. Laura had worked in passenger transport for many years and knew all the intricacies of her profession. She cheerfully shouted from a distance, "Make way, everyone, and have your travel documents ready." The crowd stirred, and someone asked, dissatisfied, "What if all the tickets are sold out and I need to get home?" The controller nodded towards where her colleagues were waiting. "In that case, you should use a taxi. As for those with tickets, please quickly line up one by one. Enter quietly and move straight to the cabin. Let children and the elderly go first." The shapeless crowd had now transformed into an orderly line, and the shouts and distracting jokes had also ceased. Beto enjoyed the spectacle of organized passenger boarding. When the controller checked the last ticket, he praised his assistant. "Laura, you have a rare talent. You shouldn't run around on buses as a controller, you should perform in the circus arena." The compliment pleased the single woman, and she flirtatiously winked at Beto. "Why do I need unnecessary popularity? I've never dreamed of fame. But a man like you, Beto, I wouldn't mind snagging. Unfortunately, I don't succeed in my personal life." "Oh, Laura, don't be so modest. I heard you have no shortage of admirers." "There are plenty of admirers, but they are of no use. You, Beto, on the other hand, are something else. It's a shame I'm late." The displeased elderly lady who had caused a scene during boarding decided to chime in on this exchange of pleasantries. "You rushed us yourselves, and now you can't stop talking. Laura, why don't you go to another bus? The driver there is also looking for his happiness and can't find it. As for Beto, he's a family man, he has people to take care of, and he doesn't have time for nonsense." Alba's speech once again engaged the audience, and a disappointed Laura stepped off the bus, saying, "Have a safe journey." Beto waved his hand. "Thank you, Laura." The doors closed with a characteristic hiss. The driver turned and cheerfully said to the passengers, "Well, friends, shall we go?" Beto loved his job very much. He loved the passengers, who showed him something new every day. For nearly 2 decades, he had been sitting behind the wheel in the mornings, taking people to the surrounding villages and towns. Over the years, he had become well acquainted with the psychology of passengers. He could always spot a potential troublemaker in the crowd at a glance. Today, he didn't see any particularly dangerous passengers aside from Marina. But Beto knew this elderly woman well because he had given her a ride for a feast several times. Normally, their company didn't condone private rides, but the park director turned a blind eye to the actions of certain drivers. Beto was allowed to do so because he had a large family. He often mentioned, among his male peers, "I have 4 kids and a beloved wife to support." His habit of reminding everyone of his special purpose led to him earning the nickname the Best Father. The moniker had stuck to Beto so firmly that even the chief blurted it out without thinking when a reporter visited the bus depot to write an article about the company's best driver. "You have to talk to the best father. He's our star." The journalist didn't understand what they were talking about and furrowed his brow in concentration. However, Ignacio Duran wasn't bothered by the cameraman's confusion and continued in the same spirit. "Even though we have a selection of excellent staff, Beto Alvarez is the backbone. You could say he's the cornerstone of our enterprise." The reporter continued to blink in confusion and asked, "Why do you call this person so strangely?" The reason for the correspondent's misunderstanding finally dawned on the director, and he laughed heartily. "The hero of your future article, or whatever you're planning to write about him, has 4 little kids. Nowadays, not every family can afford such a large brood. So, feed them, dress them, and shoe them." The reporter timidly interjected, "But the government supports families like his." The fleet director looked at the young man condescendingly. "Young man, do you think you can support such a family on government assistance alone? You need to work hard to make ends meet. And our Beto is a real man, strong and dedicated. That's what you should write about. I insist on characterizing him like this." The reporter had been bombarding Beto with questions for a long time. The man sweated under the pressure for 2 hours and couldn't wait for the interview, which felt more like an interrogation, to end. When the ordeal was over, he headed to the director's office. "Ignacio, you really put me through the ringer. Are there really no other worthy individuals besides me?" The chief smiled at his subordinate. "Believe it or not, Beto, there are none like you. Everyone has their vices, no matter how small. But you're like a crystal clear man. You don't drink, you don't smoke, and you don't even fool around with women. You are unique. It's pleasant for anyone to receive praise from their superiors." Beto softened his tone a bit. "So you decided to put me through this? But this is the last time. I won't take the heat for everyone anymore. It's easier for me to run an extra route than to answer a journalist's dumb questions." "All right, Beto, don't get worked up. You're just doing your job. As for that young fellow, he's doing his. And you're entitled to a bonus for the moral damage. I've already signed the papers." Beto started smiling. "Well, that's a different story. For a good bonus, I can put up with a little more. This incident happened about 2 years ago, right before the professional holiday. There was a big article in the newspaper about the challenging work of a bus driver. The material was featured on the front page, along with a large photograph of Beto Alvarez. Perhaps for a whole month, the guys congratulated Beto. His whole big family was proud of his achievements. One day, my kilo came home from school and shouted from the doorway, "Dad, they gave me an excellent mark for you." At first, he and his wife were shocked by such a statement, but later they realized that their son had received an excellent grade for an essay about his father's work achievements. In short, the hero's fate turned out to be pleasant. It was doubly pleasant because the boss kept his word, and Beto received a bonus equal to 1 month's salary for the holiday. This significant financial boost was greatly appreciated at the time, as the family was constantly struggling to make ends meet. In addition to the bonus, at the award ceremony, Beto received a certificate that his eldest daughter Valeriana proudly hung on the living room wall. They hadn't finished celebrating the festivities when Ignacio invited the best worker to his office. The boss began the conversation from afar. "Beto, I can't even imagine what it's like to raise 4 little ones. As far as I know, your wife doesn't work." Beto didn't like to air his family problems for public discussion and simply replied, "Today, it's not easy for anyone, so the number of children in a family doesn't matter. Besides, I'm not used to complaining. My wife and I decided right away that we'd have many kids because we both grew up in large families. The boss carefully studied the driver's face as if he couldn't bring himself to address the main topic of the conversation. I was an only child, and my wife and I have only one son, though she wanted a daughter. But we kept postponing the second child, and time flew by. People mistakenly think they have a whole lifetime ahead of them, but then they find themselves at the finish line, and it's too late to change anything. Beto was listening to the director's strange speech and trying to guess the purpose of all of this. In passing, Ignacio also reminisced about his youthful dreams of creating a universal car, as his engineering diploma had been gathering dust in a desk drawer. Only after all these pleasant memories did he voice the main topic of the conversation. Beto, I've been thinking for a long time before calling you for this conversation. I know very well that many drivers, including you, sometimes take on extra jobs. I don't mind people having the opportunity to earn extra money if it doesn't harm the common cause. On the contrary, I'm even willing to help with that. I've been watching you closely, and I see that you're someone who can be trusted. Beto decided to assist his boss. Ignacio, if you want to offer me a special task, I'd be happy to do it. The boss breathed a sigh of relief. Thank you for understanding me correctly. Yes, the task is specific, and I can only entrust it to a reliable person in whom I have full confidence. It's nothing complicated. You'll just need to deliver a cargo to an address I'll provide and take the money. The only thing required of you is to keep things confidential. Ignacio, I understand. You can completely rely on me. Very well. I promise that for this small favor, you'll receive a good reward. The next day, after this conversation, Beto loaded 2 large boxes into his bus. He didn't ask the boss about what was inside those cardboard boxes. He delivered these boxes to a village not far from the end of his daily route. The detour took only a little extra time, and he had a crisp new banknote in his pocket. The amount of the reward pleased him greatly, and he thought, for such generous tips, I'm willing to do these extra jobs every day. However, the boss didn't ask Beto for assistance very often. Sometimes it was just a couple of times a week, and there were even months when no special deliveries were needed. Beto didn't ask unnecessary questions and patiently awaited the next request. This arrangement suited both parties. He didn't try to remember those who came to pick up the boxes, and he had no interest in the contents of the cargo he transported. Today, just before heading out on his route, the boss stopped by the garage. Beto, can I talk to you for a minute? Beto stepped out, already knowing in advance what his director would ask. As usual, Ignacio glanced around to maintain confidentiality. He was clearly agitated about something, but Beto didn't attach much importance to it. After all, a person in a managerial position could have all sorts of troubles. In a hushed voice, the boss said, Beto, tomorrow you'll need to deliver something to the neighboring village. Beto's eyes widened. But, Ignacio, it's such a detour. More than 100 kilometers. My bus is already struggling as it is. The boss interrupted him. You'll take my car, and you'll have to leave late in the evening, but I'll personally send you off and provide all the paperwork. Beto was surprised again because he had previously transported cargo without any accompanying documentation. Ignacio, can I know what kind of goods it is? Although I'm not overly curious, I'd like to know just in case. The boss smirked in a somewhat crooked way. It's nothing special, just regular hardware. You'll receive the money on the spot and bring the car back to the garage. You can take a day off the next day. I've already informed Javier, your partner. Beto had already forgotten when he last had time off with his family, so the possibility of getting an unplanned day off was very pleasing to him. He was looking forward to spending time with his family in the great outdoors, going fishing with Kilo while his wife and daughter would be making a delicious fish soup over an open fire. The driver's fantasies were so realistic that he could even taste the dish in his mouth. But the pleasant trance was interrupted by the elderly woman who had taken a seat in the front row. Beto, where are you going? I needed to be dropped off earlier, and now I'll have to walk back nearly a kilometer." The man who accused the old lady of unfair trading cheerfully remarked, "Marina, 1 kilometer for you is just a warm-up. Don't pretend to be helpless. I remember last year, you were plundering the farmer's field. I saw you with my own eyes. You were moving so fast, filling a whole sack, that even I, a man, envied your strength." The passengers livened up and also started recalling Marina's small and big misdeeds. Beto turned the bus around and drove to the turn where the path led to the other part of the village. The elderly woman grabbed her empty bucket and, with a tearful voice, expressed her gratitude to the driver. "Thank you, Beto. I would have had to walk back in the other direction. It's not fun to be old, my legs hurt. And you." The old lady didn't get a chance to list her aches and pains because the bus came to a stop with a hiss. Marina quickly hopped off the step and dashed along the path like a sprinter. "Oh, the old lady is quite spry. I'm always amazed at the endurance of the older generation. My grandmother sometimes pulls off feats that leave you in awe." The bus continued on its route. The talkative passenger continued to praise the elderly people for a while, and the remaining passengers also began to share stories about their grandparents' achievements. Beto considered turning on the radio, but he changed his mind. After all, the real-life stories of the villagers were much more interesting than any music. Despite many years of married life, Beto felt a sense of excitement every time he returned home. Within the family circle, he forgot about fatigue and work-related troubles. The lively chatter of the twins, Basilio and Pedro, filled him with so much positivity that he felt ready to move mountains. Out of habit, he carefully opened the apartment door this evening, hoping to quietly slip inside, but the youngest Alvarez boys yelled out together, "Dad's home." The little boys hung onto their father's arms and, talking over each other, began recounting their daily adventures. Pedro, being the older one, reported Basilio's misdeeds. "Dad, you won't believe what Basilio did today. He made everyone eat soap." The 6-year-old mischief maker pounced on his brother. "Don't lie, I didn't make them. They wanted to blow soap bubbles on their own." The younger boy was about to burst into tears, but Eugenia Alvarez interrupted the younger son's dramatic performance. "Okay, both of you, go to your room. Dad's tired from work, and you're upsetting him with your foolishness." The boys retreated, but their voices were soon heard coming from the kids' room. Trying to reason with the brothers, Melesio said, "If you don't calm down, I'll hang you on the balcony instead of bath brooms. I'm stuck on math, and you're both yelling at the top of your lungs. You should be tidying up, toys are scattered everywhere." The criticism had an effect on the twins, and they fell silent. But Beto was intrigued by the incident that had occurred at the kindergarten. "Eugenia, what's the soap story with our troublemakers?" Basilio got into trouble. There was supposed to be a celebration of soap bubbles, and the teacher only gave store-bought bottles to the most well-behaved kids because there wasn't enough of them for everyone. So, our son decided to restore justice and quickly gave a master class on how to create soap bubbles in the simplest way. He demonstrated it himself, showing how to eat a piece of soap properly so you could blow bubbles from your mouth. But did something go wrong? Exactly. Fortunately, not all the children had a chance to use Basilio's advice. But the effect started earlier than planned. Before going outside, the entire group was filled with bubbles. The little ones were delighted, but the teachers saw our sons act as a deliberate misdeed. If I understand correctly, they called me to come to the kindergarten. The woman gazed earnestly into her husband's eyes. "I've sorted it all out. I promised that you'd have a serious talk with our son. You'll fulfill your parental duty, but after dinner." But, in my opinion, the educators didn't pay attention. How couldn't they notice that the entire group went to the bathroom at the same time? Beto recalled his childhood pranks. His parents also had to deal with his school misadventures. However, his father used a belt for discipline instead of words. It was an ancient method that always worked. Beto had also resorted to the belt when the youngest children drove him crazy, but his wife was vehemently against physical punishment for the kids. Eugenia, you have to understand that not doing anything will soon have our twins running wild. Indeed, there were ongoing issues with the youngest members of the family. The older children never caused problems. On the contrary, they were always held up as examples at school. Valeriana graduated with an excellent diploma and easily entered the university. Melesio was also well regarded and had a passion for computer technology. The couple had not planned to expand their family when Eugenia became pregnant for the third time. Her husband took the news with joy. "This is a gift from God. Eugenia, not everyone is blessed with children, so we should gratefully accept this gift. I myself was the fifth child in my family and never felt deprived in any way." Eugenia also grew up in a family with many children. She was the eldest and often had to help her mother. As a result, she had to give up the pursuit of receiving a higher education. Eugenia trained as a pastry chef but only worked in her field for a few years before the birth of their first child. After that, Melesio was born, and she had been planning to find work. But her husband kept dissuading her. "I can provide for the family, so your task is to make our lives comfortable at home." Eugenia spent her entire day doing household chores. However, throughout her life, she never once regretted dedicating herself to her family. She always remembered her mother's words. "A woman's highest calling is to have children. So, you should be happy that everything is in order at home." The arrival of twins further strengthened the family, and Eugenia cherished peace and tranquility in her home more than anything else in the world. However, in recent times, financial issues in the family have intensified. After dinner, she decided to talk to her husband about it. When the children dispersed to their rooms, she cautiously asked, "Beto, should I consider getting a job after all?" A dark shadow immediately crossed her husband's face. "Eugenia, you are bringing this up again. We already agreed that you would do the chores at home, and my responsibility is to earn money. You see how hard I work, bringing every penny home. Beto, you can't work like this your entire life. You'll wear yourself out, and I want to spend my old age with you. Besides, the twins will start school this year, and that means our expenses will increase. I understand the changes coming up. My boss gave me an additional job. I'll be making a few more thousand. It's not much, but at least it's stable income. Beto, you can't even imagine how high prices have become. It's scary to go to the store. I was offered a part-time job nearby, and they only gave me 2 days to decide because there are many applicants." "What kind of job is it?" Eugenia noticed that her husband's enthusiasm had waned and continued. "It's a cleaning job at a beauty salon. It's not complicated, it's just a couple of times a day to clean up and take out the trash. The salary is not high either, but it's something." The man pondered, weighing the pros and cons of such a decision. But since the pros outweighed the cons, he said, "All right, I won't stand in your way. If you want to work, go ahead. If you don't like it, you can quit at any time." Eugenia was delighted with her husband's agreement, and as a sign of gratitude, she hugged him tightly. "Thank you, my dear. This will give me the opportunity to change my life a little. I sometimes feel so bored staying at home all day within these 4 walls. It can be quite lonely at times." Beto was taken aback by his wife's revelation. He had never even considered that her role as a homemaker made Eugenia uncomfortable. However, during their discussion about her employment, he forgot to tell her about his upcoming trip. He only remembered it before going to sleep. "Eugenia, I forgot to tell you that I'll be returning very late tomorrow. It's possible I might not be free until closer to morning." The woman frowned, asking, "Another special task from the boss?" "Well, yes. Just don't discuss it with anyone. Beto, you're a strange person. Who can I talk to when I don't leave the house during the day? I warned you, just in case. You never know. If a conversation comes up, you might inadvertently mention that I went somewhere. Do you think anyone cares? Nowadays, everyone is busy with their own lives, and no one has time to worry about you. I only have one request for you: be careful. I have a bad feeling about your secret trips. Beto himself felt an inexplicable anxiety this time, but chose not to mention it to his wife. All night, he had nightmares involving Marina, but he attributed the strange dreams to his chronic fatigue. In the morning, the man once again felt his usual energy and began getting ready for work at a leisurely pace. Eugenia also got up early to prepare her husband's breakfast and pack him a snack for the road. Her husband was watching her with affection. Eugenia, a couple of sandwiches and coffee are enough. You always pack such a hearty meal for me, as if I'm going away for a week. Anything can happen while you're on the road, and having extra provisions doesn't hurt. Yes, by the way, I forgot to tell you that I'm due for another day off because of today's trip. So, we can plan a trip to the countryside tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to fishing. The boys will be thrilled. Pedro and Basilio overheard their father's words and cheered. Wow! We're going fishing tomorrow. Eugenia managed to calm down the rowdy twins. Beto kissed his wife and the boys and headed off to work. All day, he had been thinking about the upcoming family outing and couldn't wait for his shift to end. By evening, Beto felt an overwhelming fatigue again. He longed to go home, but he had a special assignment from the boss ahead of him. He parked his bus in the garage and headed to the warehouses where the loading was supposed to take place. Although he wasn't late, Ignacio was already there, and his nervous movements and quivering voice betrayed his anxiety. Ignacio's unusual behavior made Beto a bit uneasy. Beto chose not to ask his boss too many questions and began loading the prepared crates into the vehicle. Damn, the cargo is heavy today. What's inside? Beto asked. Ignacio grinned slyly. Knowing too much can shorten your life. Besides, sometimes extra information can be dangerous to your health. You better hurry, because we can't afford to be late. The recipient doesn't like waiting. When all the crates were in the vehicle, Ignacio handed Beto the documents. Here are the delivery notes, but you should only give them to the customer after receiving the payment. The amount is specified at the end. If he refuses to pay, return with the cargo. Did you get it? Beto, as his boss did, started feeling nervous. He asked, Ignacio, are you not telling me something, or am I making things up? The director tried to remain composed, even forcing a smile, but it appeared unnatural. It was evident that he had switched to a more formal mode of communication. Beto, I don't understand you. You initially agreed to this, and now you have doubts. Your task is to deliver the cargo. That's it, no more distractions. Although Beto didn't like his boss's sudden change of mood, he simply shrugged. Yes, what's the matter? I'm the one who does the job. I'll do everything exactly as you say. He didn't engage in an argument with the director, mostly because he feared losing the extra income and the unscheduled day off. The engine roared, and the car set off. Ignacio followed behind the vehicle. Call me as soon as you deliver the cargo, he reminded Beto. All right, Ignacio. Beto wanted to complete the boss's assignment as quickly as possible, so he pushed the battered car to 100 kilometers per hour. According to his modest calculations, the round trip shouldn't take more than 4 hours. The only variable was the cargo delivery. Beto was uneasy about the peculiar protocol that the director had insisted upon. The thought of what kind of cargo has the boss loaded onto the truck, and why is he so worried about it, constantly nagged at him. To gain some clarity, Beto decided to check the shipping documents. However, the documents listed items with long numbers, a total of 421 units, without any specifics. He strongly considered stopping the car to inspect at least one box, but after some thought, he abandoned that idea. It would be a waste of time. I need to finish dealing with this mysterious cargo and get back home. Besides, in the future, I need to inspect the contents before taking on unknown goods. I could unknowingly fall afoul of the law. For 2 years, this sensible thought had never crossed his mind, and Beto regretted his careless attitude towards the boss's assignments. Beto arrived in the village several minutes ahead of the agreed-upon time. But no one came to greet him, so he had to flash his headlights 3 times. Despite this, no one showed up. Beto muttered to himself, "Just like in a spy movie. If the cargo is legal, why all this secrecy?" He was about to give a sound signal, but first he saw one shadow, then another ahead. Soon, a man with a hoarse voice said, "What are you waiting for, driver? Get out of the car. We need to talk." Beto opened his car door. "Guys, why all the fuss? Let's exchange money for the cargo. I've been ordered to deliver it, and the rest isn't my business." The same person with an unpleasant voice drew closer and started threatening. "Driver, stop the chit-chat. Do as you were told if you don't want trouble." Beto stepped out of the car, leaving the door ajar. The man grabbed his arm and demanded, "Where are the money and the delivery notes?" Beto attempted to free himself from the grip. "Hey, man, what's going on? You're supposed to give me the money for the cargo first, and then I'll hand over the documents." "That's what Ignacio said." The voice replied, "Don't try to fool us. Last time, the cargo disappeared, and Ignacio got paid for it. He promised to return the entire sum today, along with the next batch of cargo." Beto was beginning to realize that this conversation was taking a bad turn. It is known that in critical situations, the brain works intensely. Suddenly, the man understood that it was better for him to get away from this place. He leaped back into the car and hit the gas. But before he could shut the car door, the second person, who had not uttered a word until then, managed to slip his foot inside. Beto wanted to slam the car door, but the intruder blocked it. "Look, he's a spry one. We need to take him to Jacinto. We might have to get the money out of him the old-fashioned way." Beto carelessly leaned forward to free the door, but in the next moment, he hit Beto with something heavy on his head, and he lost consciousness. He was lying in the middle of a meadow, the sun beating down mercilessly from high in the sky. Beto tried to bury his head in the grass, but it did little to shield him from the heat. Suddenly, right above him, he saw Eugenia's face. She looked concerned and whispered something, but Beto couldn't make out her words. He begged her to speak louder, but she continued to move her lips without sound. Then, Eugenia's face disappeared, leaving only her voice. "Beto, save yourself, you're in danger." These words struck his consciousness, and he snapped out of the oblivion. Beto couldn't tell how long he had been unconscious, but when he finally struggled to open his eyes, he was blinded by bright light streaming through the gaps in the wooden structures surrounding him. After looking around, he realized that he was inside a typical rural barn. He tried to change his body's position, but nausea immediately surged up to his throat. Beto shouted loudly, "Hey, someone, help!" No one answered his call, only birds chirped merrily outside the walls of the structure. Beto caught his breath and shouted again, but his cries went unanswered. His head ached unbearably, and his hands and feet were bound with strips of tape. With an incredible effort of will, he moved his body closer to a large beam of sunlight, thinking it might lead to his escape. Then, he lost consciousness one more time. He was jolted back to consciousness by a stream of icy water. Someone was talking in rough language. "Get up, you scumbag, you're not here for a visit." Beto opened his eyes and saw a man he hadn't met before. This rather unpleasant-looking character seemed satisfied that the icy shower woke him up. "Well, there you go, you've woken up. Get up, Jacinto is waiting for you." Even though Beto's name didn't tell him much, he understood that it was better to comply with the bandit's command. The man who had brought him back to his senses had only untied his legs, but he helped Beto get up. In a more conciliatory tone, he said, "I don't have time to mess around with you. Move it, Jacinto doesn't like to wait." Beto ventured to ask, "How far do we have to go? I'm not feeling well." "You fool, be glad you're still alive." You could say you're incredibly lucky because Jacinto keeps stubborn debtors alive. The unkempt man supported Beto by the arm, but this didn't stop him from giving advice along the way. You better not resist. Listen to what Jacinto says and agree. Only under those conditions do you stand a chance of staying alive. Jacinto really dislikes the uncooperative. They walked another couple of 100 meters along winding paths, and the man nodded towards a rickety shack. See that? That's Jacinto's place. But it's more like a transfer base. The boss enjoys the high life, and he has plenty of women. From his escort's desperate tone, Beto understood that his companion didn't have much luck with the opposite sex, and he was somewhat envious of his boss. Beto couldn't help but remember his dream or delirium from the previous night, and the thought crossed his mind, how's my family? I should warn them. At first sight, Beto understood that the leader of the gang was just a common extortionist. Despite the era when such groups held sway, that time had passed, but its remnants persisted, still operating by the old rules. Jacinto was enjoying his meal, served by an older woman. His large build indicated a propensity for indulgence. When the escort pushed Beto into the room, the boss threw a casual look at the driver. So, what's it going to be? Are we going to resist, or shall we seek a consensus? Remembering the advice from his escort, Beto replied, let's seek a consensus. Good man, you're thinking straight. Why stick your head into a bottle through a narrow neck when we can reach an agreement? Here's the deal, we've taken the goods and the shipping documents. Everything is fine with this batch. All that's left is to settle the previous debt. You can pay by card or in cash, whichever is more convenient for you. Jacinto laughed, pleased with his clever remark. Beto tried to speak calmly. Sir, there seems to be a mistake. I'm just a regular bus driver. My boss asked me to do him a small favor, so I have absolutely no idea of any debts or other matters. Jacinto wiped his greasy hands with a towel and leaned expressively on the countertop. Listen, newcomer. I don't care who sent you or why. I need money. Call your scumbag boss and tell him you're in big trouble. Let him pay the debt, and we'll release you right away. The bandit handed Beto a mobile phone. His headache intensified, and a strong tremor he couldn't control came over him. He dialed the number of the director of the bus fleet, but he only picked up after the 6th ring, immediately shouting at his employee. Beto, where are you? What about our agreement? You were supposed to call me last night. Do you understand that you've let me down? Beto's vision darkened, and he shouted into the phone. It's you who set me up, Ignacio. I have unknown people demanding a debt from me. Deal with them. I have a family of children. I have absolutely nothing to do with your shady stuff. Beto heard his boss huffing into the phone. He wanted to tell him that it was despicable to put his employees in such a situation, but Jacinto yanked the mobile phone away. Listen, Ignacio, if you don't return the money within a day, I'll send your driver home in a few pieces. But that's not where it ends. I will reach out to you too. You know I can keep my word, so make your decisions. The gang leader hung up the phone and looked at Beto with regret. You're hooked now, man. It seems you'll have to settle things for your boss and pay me. Think of a way to do it quickly. You mentioned you have a wife and kids, right? Beto felt a chill run through him. Please, do whatever you want with me, but leave my family alone. I can work off the debt if that suits you. Jacinto laughed again, but it only made things worse for Beto. Work off these kinds of funds in your lifetime? Or maybe I'll just disassemble you for organs. Do whatever you want with me, but please spare my loved ones, I'm begging you. Jacinto looked at Beto attentively. I'll think about it. You can relax for now. Hey, Max, take him to the shed. But make sure he doesn't run away, you're in charge of him. The familiar man escorted Beto to a wooden structure. He was busy, and his rural dialect was clearly evident in his speech. I'll get you something to eat in a bit, but don't expect much. You'll have to get your share of my meal. Beto collapsed onto the ground, where fresh hay was spread in thick layers. But Max didn't leave right away. Man, don't hold a grudge against me. I once got into trouble myself, and Jacinto saved me from prison. So now, I'm working off a debt. It was tough at first. I used to dream of running away. Then I got used to it. The supervisor disappeared for a couple of minutes and returned with a bowl of delicious-smelling stew. Eat it. Claudia gave it to me on the sly, so Jacinto wouldn't find out. She's a kind woman, and her nephew is the real scoundrel. Beto ate the soup greedily but didn't let Max's words go unnoticed. A wild idea crossed his mind, and he looked at his overseer hopefully. I really need to make a quick call in just half a minute. You see, my wife and kids are very worried about me. Max's eyes widened. What? Are you crazy? If Jacinto finds out, he'll kill me. He won't find out. I'll be quiet. I'll hide in the hay, and no one will hear a thing. The man went out of the door and returned shortly. He handed Beto a basic mobile phone. Here, make the call. But do it fast. Beto frantically dialed the number of the bus fleet director, but the automated voice message informed him that the number didn't exist. Reluctantly, he had to call his wife, as he had no other options. When she heard his voice, Eugenia cried out. Beto, what's happening? Where are you? With time running out and Max anxiously watching the street, Beto quickly whispered. Eugenia, go to the park, to Ignacio. He'll explain everything to you. The overseer snatched the phone from Beto. Rats everywhere. I don't want to face the consequences because of my kindness. Beto couldn't sleep. His head continued to throb, and his taped-up legs throbbed. His own thoughts tormented him. He could hear Max moving around on the other side of the thin shed wall. Trying not to think about what awaited him the next day, Beto focused on recalling the pleasant moments from his family life. Unbeknownst to him, Beto drifted into an uneasy sleep. Like the previous night, he was plagued by nightmares. Frightening images accompanied by loud voices filled his dreams, followed by the sound of gunshots. He tried to get up, but with his hands tied, it took a while. He could hear gunfire nearby. No, this isn't a dream. They're really shooting. Beto cautiously crept to the locked door and, hoping the guard would hear, softly asked, Dear sir, what's happening there? But there was no sign of the overseer. The man attempted to open the door, but it didn't budge. So he tried to find another way out, encouraging himself with words. Beto, search more actively. It can't be that there's no escape in this rural shed. However, the man couldn't finish inspecting the wooden structure. He heard voices from the outside. Celio, you check the shed, and I'll take a look in the bathhouse. Jacinto couldn't have disappeared that fast. He could. You don't even know what he's capable of. He's like water, he can slip through the tiniest crack. The door of the shed burst open, and Beto was blinded by a powerful beam of a spotlight. Is there someone in here? Drag him out. I also caught a fish in the bushes. In the next moment, they threw a bag over Beto's head and dragged him towards the exit. Then, like a log, he was thrown onto the back seat of a car. Soon, another bundle landed next to him. The air was scarce, and the polyethylene clung to his mouth, making it hard to breathe. Beto held his breath and bit into the slippery plastic. He succeeded, and fresh air rushed in, bringing with it the familiar smell of unwashed bodies mixed with cheap cigarettes. Max, is that you? Something mumbled from below. As Beto couldn't help his overseer at the moment, he whispered some advice. Take a deep breath, and the bag will stick to your face. Try to bite it. The polyethylene isn't airtight, it's the regular kind from a store. A quiet struggle took place on the floor, and Beto figured out that Max was trying to put his advice into practice. The battle against the plastic took a while, and finally, he heard Max's triumphant voice. Got it. Thanks, buddy, for the tip. I nearly choked. What happened there? Rival gangsters busted into our place. They sent the rest to the other side, and I managed to hide. And Jacinto? I have no idea where he is. He probably escaped. He always gets away with it. I wonder where they're taking us. Only God knows. We need to save our strength. If they notice us talking here, we're in big trouble. The men fell silent. Their uncomfortable situation weighed heavily on them, so Beto tried to focus on something else. He listened to the motor noise and suddenly realized they were in the director's car. He knew Ignacio's car well, but his tied hands prevented him from reaching the toolbox. After a few attempts, he gave up on the idea and decided to wait for a more opportune moment. They traveled for a very long time, and even once the car made a stop, Max whispered from below. "Refueling the car, you scoundrel. What a shame we missed such a moment. We could have slipped away quietly." Beto reluctantly agreed. "Yes, we could have, if my hands weren't tied." The car set off again and traveled relatively smoothly for a few hours on the road, then started bouncing on potholes. This rough ride had the heaviest impact on Max. "Where are these jerks taking us?" Max exclaimed. "I'd really love to know too. I think my kidneys hurt so much. I can't take it anymore." Beto replied. As if in response to Max's complaint, the car came to a halt. The door slammed shut, and someone yelled loudly, "Gil, take the goods." From outside, cries and unfamiliar voices were heard. Max asked nervously, "Do you hear that?" "I do, but I don't understand this language," Beto replied. "Oh, man, we're in trouble. God forbid, they'll tear us apart. My dear mother won't even recognize her son, who died so ignominiously." Max fretted. Beto shouted at his comrade, "Don't panic prematurely." Beto strained to listen to the conversation outside, attempting to understand any word. Only towards the end did the one who had brought them there speak to someone else in plain English. "This Gil thinks he's the only clever one. I just about managed to haggle a price with him. Celio, if the guys haven't died in there yet, take them to the house." Max couldn't contain himself. "That jerk. He's the one who ratted us out, Celio. And he used to be so polite and obsequious with Jacinto, licking his boots." But Max couldn't finish his indignant monologue because they were roughly grabbed again and pulled out of the car. The stocky delivery man said, "Celio, tell him I don't need euros. He should pay for the goods in dollars, 10,000 each." Soon their own car drove away, and they removed the bags from Beto's head. The bright light made him squint, but the unpleasant sensation was fully offset by his ability to breathe freely. Someone else next to him was also breathing heavily. Beto turned his head and saw Max's relieved face. "At least you're alive, that's something to be grateful for." A man with a gray beard in strange clothing inspected them with an assessing look. He shouted something in his own language, and a woman around the same age as him, presumably his wife, approached him. Beto figured out that her name was Oria. The husband explained something to her for a long time, and she just nodded and smiled. Then the woman went to a big guy in the same attire as her husband and pointed at Max. Max chatted away in his gibberish, and they forcibly dragged Beto further into the courtyard. The owner took out a folding knife, and Beto involuntarily flinched. The man looked understandingly at him and grinned, muttering something in his own language. In one swift motion, Gil cut the ropes binding Beto's hands. After 2 days of captivity, the sticky tape had caused bloody wounds. The pain was excruciating, and tears welled up in Beto's eyes. Gil observed the captive's face for a while and then continued speaking in his dialect. He didn't stop talking and led Beto towards a building that resembled a barracks. The captive guessed that this was now his new place of residence. The long room had only one small window, so the newcomer didn't immediately take in the interior of this dwelling and the people with whom he would now have to share his unfortunate fate. The new resident also aroused interest, and people approached him from different directions. What struck Beto the most was the emptiness in the eyes of the barracks inhabitants. He asked loudly. Does anyone here speak English? A tanned boy of about 12 came forward. Although he spoke with a strong accent, Beto could understand him. My name is Ramiro. I got left behind by the group, and the police took me. Then Gil came and bought me. How did he buy you? Beto asked. He has money, Ramiro replied casually, as if it were an everyday occurrence. Beto was struck by this matter-of-factness. He asked the boy, Zero Ramiro, do you know where we are? At least, which country? No, I only know we're near the sea. Come, I'll show you your place. Ramiro accompanied his words with gestures, and Beto understood that the boy found it easier to communicate this way. He guided Beto deeper into the barracks and pointed to an empty bunk, saying, This is where Salvador used to sleep. He was very sick, and the boss scolded him. But Salvador died recently, so his place is free now. Beto was afraid to touch the bed where his predecessor had slept not long ago. It was unknown what illness that person had. Just the thought of having to sleep on that bed made him feel sick. He decisively removed the dirty bedding. However, Ramiro exclaimed in a warning tone, You can't do that, Oreo will scold us. It needs to be washed, but we're not allowed to leave. Using gestures and broken words, Ramiro began explaining to the newcomer the simple rules of life on this farmstead owned by Gil and Oria. From his account, Beto understood that the couple was very stingy and didn't pay their workers. Those in this barracks were the ones Gil paid for out of his own pocket, and these people were considered his property. On the other side of the farmstead, there was a house where the hired workers lived. The owner paid them very little. At the end of his explanation, Ramiro added, Gil has a large farm with many horses, cows, and chickens. I look after the horses, and the women work in the fields. Are there women here? Beto asked in disbelief. Ramiro pointed with his hand to a distant corner, separated from the rest of the room by a curtain. Beto was truly shocked. Is this kind of thing still happening in the world? It's like something from the Middle Ages. And what are the authorities doing? Beto had yet to realize that the place he had ended up had entirely different rules. It was futile to argue or prove anything to those for whom the owner had paid. This year, spring arrived particularly early. By the end of April, everything around had turned green, and the air was filled with pleasant aromas. But Eugenia had no time to enjoy the awakening nature. She had only 2 hours to prepare lunch for her children and then head to her second job at the beauty salon. After her husband mysteriously disappeared more than 4 years ago, Eugenia had heard nothing about him. She hoped that this last phone call would be the thread that would help her unravel what had happened. Literally the next day, early in the morning, she went to the bus depot where her husband had worked for many years. Eugenia spent several hours in the reception area, waiting for the head of the company. The young secretary, inappropriately dressed in heavy makeup, glared at her throughout this time. As the workday was nearing its end, the girl said impatiently, Ma'am, I already told you that Ignacio wouldn't be here today. You're wasting your time sitting here. The tone of this overpainted girl upset Eugenia. She responded, Why are you speaking to me like that? The secretary retorted, Well, because you're bothering me. You're sitting here like a statue. Just so you know, statues stand still, and there's no need for you to be rude to me. The girl softened her tone a bit. You're forcing me to talk this way. I told you right away that the director probably wouldn't show up today. He has an important meeting. But I have something just as important to discuss with him. My husband disappeared, and, by the way, he's your employee. He called me and said he was in trouble. Before that, he went on a job assignment for your director to a neighboring province at night. The secretary was indignant and laughed hysterically. What are you saying? Beto works during the day. Maybe he just had some personal business at night and forgot to tell you. Beto is a prominent man. Our ticket inspectors even look at him with interest. Eugenia was very uncomfortable listening to the gossip, and she retorted, What are you implying? The secretary responded. Exactly what you thought. Don't blame the boss. Look for your husband somewhere else. The verbal confrontation drained the secretary's energy, and for a brief moment, both women fell silent. After a minute of silence, the girl spoke in a friendlier tone. I recommend you come back early tomorrow. The boss always starts his workday in his office, and then he goes about his business. Your husband also leaves in the morning. I'm sure you'll find your dear one safe and sound. Eugenia considered this advice wise and even thanked the girl. She didn't tell the children anything, although the twins pestered her with questions all evening. Mom, where's Dad? He promised that we'd go fishing. Don't bother me. Can't you see I'm busy? Dad is running a little late because he has some important matters to attend to. Eugenia had no real answers for her children, so she pretended to be busy with household chores. She could brush off the little ones, but the older children wouldn't let it go. Her daughter was the first to express her concern. After dinner, she stayed in the kitchen and began washing the dishes. The girl initiated an uncomfortable conversation. Mom, I have a bad feeling. Maybe something happened to Dad. We should report to the police. Eugenia didn't mention the phone call from her husband and simply said, Valeriana, let's wait for one more day. I went to the bus depot today, but I couldn't find your dad's boss. I'll go again tomorrow, and hopefully things will become clear. However, Ignacio was absent not only the next day, but also for the rest of the work week. The secretary, no longer displaying her impertinence, appeared disoriented. We're all shocked. The boss isn't at home, and even his wife is worried. He hasn't been to the hospital either. We're all on edge, and we don't know what to think, she said. A week later, the secretary herself called Eugenia. During her last visit, Eugenia had earnestly asked her for this favor. The girl's voice was agitated. Ignacio left, but no one, not even his wife, knows where he is. Things are quite chaotic here. There's a massive audit happening in the accounting department. I'm sorry, but has Beto shown up yet? No, Eugenia replied. He hasn't called here either. Oh, what's going to happen to all of us now? Eugenia was the least concerned about the fate of the bus depot. After a week of waiting, she suddenly realized that something serious had indeed happened to her husband. She lost her patience and burst into tears, wailing. Beto, who have you left us for? How will I go on without you? A sense of hopelessness sapped her will to resist. After crying, she fell into a state of apathy. Eugenia didn't know what to do next. Her husband had been the mainstay of the family, solving any problems that arose. She couldn't even imagine how she'd cope without him. Her imagination painted the bleakest scenarios, but she forced herself to pull them together. If I lose myself, our family will fall apart. I can't be weak. I must gather my strength for the sake of the children. With tremendous willpower, she managed to withstand this blow of fate. After a week of waiting, she told Valeriana. You were right, I should have reported his disappearance right away. Her daughter replied. Mom, I had a feeling from the start that something like this would happen. We lost a whole week, waiting for who knows what. What if Dad gets into some trouble and needs our help? Sweetheart, I've been thinking about that every day. But how can we help him if we don't even know where he is? The next morning, Eugenia went to the local police station. The officer on duty looked at her apathetically. We only accept reports if more than 3 days have passed since the disappearance. It's been over a week now. It's already the 8th day. Have you asked around with his friends and co-workers? Yes, I've called everyone and visited his workplace. The rotund officer reluctantly said. All right, write a report. He spoke as if he were doing her a favor. After she submitted her report, he read it several times and scratched his head. I'll forward your report, but I can't guarantee a quick result. People disappear in droves, we search for them, and then they find themselves. It turns out someone was at their country house, and someone found a new family. It happens. Eugenia didn't respond. She returned home and tried to distract herself from the negative thoughts. Housework was the best way to shift her focus, so she decided to do a thorough cleaning. Her mother saw her industriously at work and didn't ask any extra questions. She quickly changed and enthusiastically joined in the cleaning. When the house sparkled with cleanliness, the daughter said thoughtfully, "Mom, they say love can even save you from a distance. I've never done this before, but now I pray every day. I ask the Lord to help Dad and us. I love Dad so much." With tears in her eyes, Eugenia replied, "My dear, I love him very much too." Weeks turned into months. Summer gave way to autumn, and then snowfalls began. All their savings that Eugenia and her husband had carefully set aside were running out. They had to cut back on various expenses, but they still didn't have enough money, even for the essentials. One day, Pedro came home from school with a fever. Eugenia rushed to the medicine cabinet but couldn't find any fever-reducing powders. She called her daughter. "Valeriana, do you have some change? Pedro has a fever, and we don't have anything here. I couldn't even find aspirin tablets." Valeriana rummaged in her purse and found a few coins. "Mom, I still have a little left on my card. I'll run to the pharmacy." Throughout the night, the youngest brother tossed and turned in a fevered delirium, and by morning he had developed a severe cough. They had to call a doctor. The pediatrician examined the child for a long time, listening to his chest. "Your little one has bronchitis, so we need to take treatment seriously. I'll write you some prescriptions, and you should follow the treatment regimen." The doctor wrote several prescriptions and, as she was leaving, cautioned, "Under no circumstances should you miss the medication, or the condition might progress to the lungs." Eugenia nodded in agreement but was already thinking about where to find the money to buy the prescribed medications. Valeriana was silently watching her sick brother. When the doctor left, she said firmly, "Mom, this can't go on like this anymore. I'll find a job." "No, daughter, getting an education is the most important thing." "Mom, don't talk nonsense. How can I focus on higher education when my family is in a critical situation? I'll try to combine work and study or switch to part-time. I'm sure the college administration will understand my situation. And if they don't, then I'll take an academic leave for a year." Eugenia tried to dissuade her daughter, but Valeriana didn't want to listen. "Mom, today we don't have money for Pedro's medicine, and tomorrow we won't even have money for bread. And we have no one to ask for help or borrow from." In deep thought, Eugenia said, "You're right, no one will help us. My siblings are scattered across the world, and I don't even know my father's relatives. And it's embarrassing to ask. I'm not used to groveling, not even to relatives." A disturbing memory resurfaced in Eugenia's mind from when her twins, Basilio and Beto, were born. At that time, she and her husband had planned to buy a new sofa because they didn't have enough sleeping space in their new apartment, which they had obtained through the city hall. However, the joy of the twins' birth was marred by her own sister. When Eugenia asked her for a small sum to help buy furniture, which they couldn't afford, Alina sneered and said, "Why have so many children if you can't provide for them? Just bringing poverty into the world. You should budget within your means." After this sermon, her sister reluctantly offered her money, but Eugenia refused to take it. She didn't accept any gifts from Alina afterward, and the resentment still lingered in her heart. However, that incident served as a lifelong lesson, and in any circumstance, this mother had learned to rely only on her own strength. The only people she could turn to were her parents, but her father and mother had long left this world. Her youngest daughter could no longer count on their assistance. Weeks went by, and there was still no news from her husband. Every week, Eugenia visited the police station to ask about the progress of looking for her husband. Initially, she was received with respect, and they promised to make every effort to locate her missing spouse. Over time, the sympathy was replaced with irritation, and, at best, they responded dismissively. "Lady, we'll inform you if anything turns up." There is no need to keep bothering us. Besides, don't distract our officers with trivial matters." The impertinent remark from the duty officer only deepened her emotional pain. Eugenia realized that she needed to take more assertive action and began to demand a meeting with the head of the department. The negotiations with the duty officer almost led to a confrontation. Eugenia initially pleaded with him, but he only smirked mockingly. "Listen, how many times do I have to explain to you that searching for missing persons is a complex process requiring human and financial resources? And you're not the only one among the victims, so you should wait instead of pestering us. Not even the head of our department can expedite the search because we have limited reserves." Desperation overwhelmed the unfortunate woman, and she blurted out, "Perhaps I should turn to your ministry for help. Maybe then you'll get moving and take all necessary measures to find my husband." This threat had an unexpected effect on the duty officer. His eyes nearly popped out of their sockets, reaching the peak of his peaked uniform cap. He bellowed at the visitor, "Are you threatening me? I can put you in the holding cell for 3 days right now." The duty officer's shouting summoned the department's staff, including a major. "What's going on here?" The duty officer, pointing a finger at Eugenia, began to complain about her. "This crazy woman is driving us all crazy. She comes to the station every week, treating it like her workplace, looking for her husband. But today, she even resorted to threatening me. And I'm, by the way, on duty." However, the accusatory speech of the grumpy duty officer had the opposite effect on the major. He stared at his subordinate with such intensity that the man nearly cowered. Afterward, the officer approached Eugenia and kindly offered, "Come with me to my office. There, you can calmly tell me everything, and be sure to provide all the details." The woman spent nearly 2 hours in the office of the deputy chief of the police department. She recounted every detail of what had happened. The major listened attentively and made several phone calls during their conversation. It became apparent in the conversation with the higher-ranking officer that the statement she had filed earlier had mysteriously disappeared. This forced her to write a new complaint. After speaking with the major, there was a renewed glimmer of hope that Eugenia clung to in her heart. But days went by, and there was still no news of her missing husband. From the sounds coming from the kitchen, Eugenia realized her daughter had returned home. Valeriana called from the kitchen, "Mom, I managed to get off work a little early today." Eugenia, tired, made her way to the kitchen. Valeriana asked, "Would you like some coffee? Or should I wait for lunch? I've almost finished making soup with dumplings. I found a wonderful recipe on the internet that requires minimal ingredients but should taste delicious." Eugenia smiled. "If you don't encourage yourself, nobody will do it. I'll wait for your signature dish." "Exactly, no need to spoil our appetite with snacks. In about 10 minutes, we can start. By the way, the boys should be back from school soon." The peaceful atmosphere and her daughter's cheerful voice had a calming effect on Eugenia. She closed her eyes. Valeriana was watching her mother's weary face, feeling like crying. She thought, "Why do we deserve all this suffering? Why has so much misfortune befallen our family all at once?" But she kept these thoughts to herself and softly said, "Mom, you should lie down and rest for at least an hour. I'll take care of things here, especially with the little ones." "Thank you, my dear. I do feel a bit drained. I'll lie down for half an hour." A brief rest helped Eugenia regain her strength, and she felt more refreshed. She checked the time and gasped, "Valeriana, why didn't you remind me? I'm running late for my salon appointment." Valeriana realized her oversight and quickly tried to explain. "Mom, I got caught up with the boys. I fed them, and then Basilio asked for help with a math problem. I completely forgot about your work. You should have a quick snack." "I don't have time, I'll eat in the evening. I'll try to finish up as soon as possible. The girls usually let me leave a little early, and the salon owner doesn't make me work late. The most important thing is to keep everything clean." "But where's Melesio?" He hasn't returned yet. He's probably hanging out with his friends again. Eugenia rushed to the door and hurried to her salon. On her way, she had a moment to think about her middle son. He's just like his father. The older he gets, the more he resembles Beto. The same habits and even the way he talks. Melesio was in his senior year of high school and dreamed of becoming a programmer. Although there were no apparent bad habits about him, what worried his mother was that he spent most of his time in front of a computer. The woman had tried on numerous occasions to change her unhealthy lifestyle. Melesio, you'll wither away in front of this monitor. Your peers are involved in sports, and you don't even go for a walk. It's harmful to sit around like this, you know? Her son just smiled, replying, Mom, to be honest, life itself is harmful because it inevitably leads to a fatal end. But I'll take your advice and try to improve. Melesio kept his promise and, a few days later, showed his mother a membership card for the swimming pool, saying, See, Mom, I've decided to increase my physical activity. I'll swim twice a week for a whole month. The woman was surprised, asking, But such a membership is quite expensive. Where did you get it? Proudly, her son replied, I bought it with my own money. Eugenia had heard a lot about gaming addiction and panicked. Melesio, are you gambling? The young man laughed, saying, You think so poorly of me. No, I'm not into that. I'm just providing some services to acquaintances for a small fee. Initially, I wanted to buy new sneakers, but after your lecture, I decided to spend the money on improving my health. Melesio's explanation seemed plausible, and his mother felt relieved. After swimming, Melesio took up running and eventually saved up enough money to buy a bicycle. This purchase delighted the twins, although Valeriana didn't share the same enthusiasm. Once, her mother overheard her daughter criticizing her brother for his extravagant spending. Melesio, our mom is working herself to the bone, and instead of buying something useful for the house, you're squandering money on junk. Eugenia immediately intervened and supported her son, saying, Dear, don't be so harsh. The bicycle and other items your brother bought with his own money are not unnecessary in our family, so Melesio is also making a valuable contribution to our collective well-being. The beauty salon where she worked was no more than a 5-minute, brisk walk from home. Eugenia was raised in an era when honest work was respected. She took her responsibilities seriously, which made her highly regarded by her colleagues. The only downside to such work was the low salary. So, after the first year of struggling through life without her husband, she had to find a second job. Initially, she tried to find a position in a pastry shop where she could work in her field of expertise. But when she showed her diploma at one workplace, an employee from the HR department laughed at her. Ma'am, your document has long lost its relevance. You didn't work in your field, and a lot of modern technologies appeared. However, I can offer you a position as a sorter on the conveyor. But, as a mother of many children, shift work might not suit you. Eugenia visited other organizations in the city, but she couldn't find anything suitable. When she was desperate to find additional income, a neighbor suggested that an urgent part-time cleaner was needed at the shopping center. Now, every morning, she rushed to the store, and after lunch, she cleaned the beauty salon. Eugenia put on a robe and, trying not to disturb the stylists, began to work. She enjoyed watching the magical process of transforming women into beauties. She also dreamt of sitting in the chair in front of the large mirror someday and seeing herself with a neat, stylish hairstyle. But even a simple haircut was an unaffordable luxury for her, and she contented herself with an old-fashioned ponytail. The girls often offered, Eugenia, let us create something amazing for you. You have such wonderful hair. The beauticians offered their services for free, but she declined, saying it was inconvenient for her to walk around with a new hairstyle. Since the salon operated by appointment, there were never any lines, and after lunch, there were very few customers. So, after the initial cleaning, Eugenia decided to take a short break in one of the empty chairs. Her gaze was fixed on Sylvia's hands as she worked with a distinguished client. This lady visited the salon once a month and always spent several hours there. This time, she decided to get a haircut and chat with the stylist. Eugenia wasn't one to eavesdrop on others' conversations, and as the trimmed strands began to fall to the floor, she went to the back room for a broom. The lady was expressing her outrage about something, and the stylist nodded in agreement. Eugenia caught a phrase that piqued her interest. "Sylvia, you can't imagine how I felt when I saw that scene of humiliation. I never thought something like this could happen in our day and age. It's like real slavery. But the most astonishing thing is that this man seemed familiar to me. Maybe I'm mistaken, but it seems like he used to work as a bus driver and even once helped me out a lot when I needed to take some things to my parents' village." The stylist tried to keep the conversation going, saying, "Nora, it often happens that a person seems familiar." "No, Sylvia, it was definitely him. That driver. I remember his face well. And he has such a distinctive way of speaking, he rolls his R's so emphatically. It's usually a defect observed in children, but here's this grown man." The cleaning supplies slipped from Eugenia's hands, and her mouth went dry. Sylvia turned around, slightly annoyed, and said, "Eugenia, you scared me. Please be more careful, I might accidentally injure the client with the scissors out of fright." "Sylvia, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it." A little incident made Eugenia's friends switch to a different topic, but she was still trembling with excitement. She remembered how Beto used to teach Melesio to pronounce the letter R. He used to take nursery rhymes with words containing that letter and even got some speech therapy guides for their sessions. The constant repeating of the R sound irritated not only Eugenia but also their neighbors. One elderly man even suspected them of mistreating animals. One day, he waited for Eugenia in the stairwell and expressed his concerns. "If you don't stop this nonsense, I'll report you. That poor animal at your place is making all sorts of strange noises. What kind of idea is it to make the poor creature suffer like that?" Eugenia tried to calm down her neighbor. "We don't have any pets." "Then who keeps growling all the time?" Melesio, whom his mother was holding by the hand, suddenly started roaring loudly, just as his father had taught him. The old man jumped in surprise, then spat in annoyance and went back home, grumbling. What kind of neighbors does God send us? Teaching a child to roar, messing around with nonsense, and scaring people. Eugenia remembered how she and her husband had laughed about the old man for a long time. Taming that stubborn letter took several months, but Melesio had successfully overcome his speech defect. However, the lessons didn't go without consequences for the domestic teacher himself. Beto started emphasizing that unfortunate letter during conversations when he forgot himself. As she was reminiscing about these moments, Eugenia kept a close eye on Sylvia's client. When the lady with her stylishly cut hair headed towards the exit, Eugenia rushed after her. In passing, she told Sylvia, "I'll be back in a minute." The stylist shrugged and said, "Of course, Eugenia, take all the time you need. You can even take 2 or 5 minutes off. Just make sure everything is spick and span here." Nora lingered by the exit, where one wall was entirely covered in mirrors. She smiled at her reflection, and upon noticing Eugenia, asked, "Did it really turn out well?" "Yes, this haircut suits you very well. Sylvia has a very light hand. That's why I don't even think about changing stylists." The client stepped out onto the street, and Eugenia followed. Nora looked at her with surprise. "Do you want to ask something?" "Yes." "How did you guess?" "I'm a lawyer, and I often find myself in such situations. I can't stand it when I'm pursued." The last sentence was delivered with strong emphasis, and Eugenia felt a bit awkward. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude, it just happened. I wanted to ask you about that man." The woman was taken aback, but she said, irritated, "Madam, which man are you asking about? I have hundreds of matters to attend to, and I can't immediately recall." "Who are you talking about?" It seemed that Nora had forgotten about her recent conversation with Sylvia, or that the story had little significance for her. So Eugenia had to clarify. I mean the man who emphasizes the letter R. You mentioned that you had encountered him before. I really need to know the details because my husband disappeared 4 years ago, and he had this peculiar speech characteristic. Eugenia sobbed uncontrollably, and Nora, frightened by her reaction, tried to console her. My dear, why do you take everything to heart so deeply? Though I understand you perfectly and don't even know how I would react if my husband disappeared. But such a fate has passed me by, and my spouse is alive and well. In fact, he seems quite happy now. Although he's pleased another woman. Nora spoke in between words as she led Eugenia to a small alley. I'll tell you everything now, just don't cry. Let's sit down on this bench and talk. From Nora's convoluted narrative, often veering off into unrelated topics, Eugenia understood that this woman had encountered a man resembling Beto during a recent trip to a small town. Nora noted with regret. My friend and I were traveling by car, and I didn't make an effort to remember the names of the places. I just remember it was a very small but cozy and clean town. We decided to visit the local market where you could buy farm produce, and that's where it all happened. This man was standing at a stall, looking completely lost, and that immediately caught my attention. Then I took a closer look at him and realized I'd seen him somewhere before, though I couldn't remember exactly where. So, I asked him about it, but before he could respond, a guy with a gray beard suddenly attacked him, punching him in the face. Eugenia was taken aback. In public? Yes, that's what shocked me as well. But what surprised me the most was that the local police completely ignored the incident. There were plenty of them at the market, yet this guy with a beard kept babbling something unintelligible. I tried to intervene, but he even raised his fist at me. Of course, the police responded to that, but not the way I expected. They asked me, in broken English, to leave the market to avoid trouble. I was quite indignant about their attitude towards guests, but my friend dragged me away. The whole situation left a very unpleasant feeling. Nora provided a detailed description of the man, and almost all the characteristics matched Beto's appearance. However, Eugenia's husband had a rather robust build and always had a crew cut, whereas the man Nora met was thin with unkempt hair. Nora felt awkward about not being able to remember more details from their brief encounter. As they said their goodbyes, she handed Eugenia her business card and said, "Please give me a call when you have a free moment. Maybe I'll remember something else important. I'll also call my friend, she probably remembers the details that slipped my mind." I won't hide it, I was so incensed by that unpleasant incident that my emotions got the better of me. Nora bid her a warm farewell and soon disappeared from view. Eugenia remained on the bench, still reflecting on the woman's story. She was afraid to put her faith in this chance glimmer of hope. Over the past 4 years, there have been so many instances of promising information that ultimately turned out to be futile. When she returned home, her older children immediately rushed to her with questions. They likely sensed from her bewildered expression that something unusual had happened. Eugenia decided there was no point in hiding from her children what Nora had told her. Valeriana shared her impressions first. "I think this might not just be a thread, but a good rope. Mom, go to the major who's been feeding you promises all along. Tell him. Maybe it will help them get a lead." Melesio, who had been silent until now, made a reasonable point. "That's a hopeless route. Our police won't even budge. If Dad ends up in another country, and there's every reason to believe that's the case, we need to go through the embassy. It's a long and thorny path. I have another suggestion. I'll try to dig into social media." Valeriana said. "Oh, why did this brilliant idea come to you only now?" "Well, yes. I couldn't think of it earlier. It just hit me today. We need photos of Dad, preferably several." The older sister wanted to tease Melesio some more, but Eugenia firmly put a stop to all her attempts. "Calm down already. You two are acting like cats and dogs, always bickering with each other. You're adults now, but your behavior is worse than that of twins. Pouting, Valeriana stormed off to her room while Melesio headed for the hallway. "Mom, I'm going to take a walk and clear my head a bit. You search for better pictures of Dad." The next day, Nora came to the salon herself. She beckoned Eugenia over. "It turns out my friend managed to take a few shots at that market, although it was very risky. They generally don't allow tourists to take any photos there except for architectural monuments. Despite the poor quality of the pictures, you could discern the features of the thin man in the white hat. However, Eugenia doubted that her husband, who had gone missing, was in the photos. He looks similar, but I'm not sure. Can you share these photos with me?" "Of course. I'll send them to your smartphone." Eugenia blushed deeply. "I have a cheap phone with buttons." Nora reassured the woman. "That's all right. There are plenty of other ways." In the evening, Nora sent the photos to Melesio via email. He enthusiastically rubbed his hands together. "Things are starting to move, ladies and gentlemen. I'm confident that our search is about to be over. By the way, Mom, did you go to the police station?" Eugenia just shrugged. "I did, but it was in vain. They told me the major was very busy and didn't have time for me. So, I left without any progress. Maybe you, son, will make some headway? I can't promise anything, but the process has already been set in motion. All we can do now is wait and hope." Melesio's optimistic attitude rubbed off on his mother, and for the first time in these years, she fell asleep peacefully. Yet even in her dreams, the thought of her husband never left her. Ramiro sat in front of an empty bowl, rubbing his thin belly with longing. "We won't last long on this food." He cast a significant glance at Beto, waiting for his approval, but Beto, his friend and mentor, remained silent. With pity in his eyes, Beto watched his companion, who had changed very little over the 4+ years. Only his voice had grown rougher, signaling that he was no longer a boy but a young man. Ramiro wistfully rolled his eyes. "I'd love to break free and eat my fill." He looked at Dorothea, hoping for her agreement, but the young woman answered. The young man ruffled his black curls. "Don't hold your breath. They'd feed you, there's no way for it to happen. The girls are afraid to even secretly swallow a berry. Look at Ariel, she wanted to indulge a little, and Oria hit her so hard on the back with a stick that she couldn't sit or sleep properly for a whole week. Tell me, Dorothea, where do such greedy people come from?" The young woman shrugged. "I don't know, Ramiro. It's not the way we do things. I never met people like this until I came here. They must think I'm dead because no one's looking for me." "Probably everyone thinks the same about me," Fernanda sadly remarked and hurriedly took the dirty dishes behind the partition at the end of the bunkhouse. Ramiro had no choice but to leave the table. The young man still complained of hunger. "I'm so hungry, it feels like I could eat a horse." Beto, during his years of captivity, had become accustomed to such scenes. However, despite his best efforts, he couldn't change anything. The hamlet was well guarded by Gil's tough guys. The slightest transgression by these hired workers was harshly punished, often involving physical violence. In the first few months, Beto bore the brunt of this cruelty due to his defiance. At first, the barracks inhabitants were cautious around him, but over time, relationships improved. Each of these unfortunate individuals had their own story. For example, these women ended up in slavery due to their own carelessness. Both girls, Dorothea and Fernanda, spoke English fairly well and were originally from nearby Asian countries. Like many of their compatriots, they went in search of work but got caught in an unpleasant situation. Dorothea was quite open about how she was deceived. "My friend and I found work through the internet. We called the factory, and they told us to come. We packed our bags and found a minibus online as well. Everything seemed fine at first. We were driven to the capital. But halfway, the driver said he needed to refuel and took a detour. He later said, 'All right, boys and girls, we've arrived.' We got scared and started screaming, but masked men showed up and beat us with sticks. They held us in a house in the woods for a few days, and then they brought us here to Gil. Dorothea narrated her story as though it had happened to someone else, not her. Beto later realized that, over time, feelings become dull. Fernanda had a similar unpleasant experience, although she was older than Dorothea. This beautiful woman with her deep black eyes left her young children at home, whom she was raising without a husband. Her spouse had died from a common infection because there was no doctor at the settlement. By the time they reached the nearest hospital, it was too late. Fernanda was not one for words and did not like to talk about herself. After work, she would always retreat to a corner and sit there for hours with an indifferent expression. Once, Beto wanted to have a simple conversation with her, but Fernanda withdrew further. It's not customary for women to talk to strange men. It's considered a terrible sin here. Beto didn't push to be friends, he just commented, "Yes, we're closer than family here. Linked together like in that famous song." Two other men, who were around 50 years old, also lived in the barack. They kept to themselves and didn't seem to understand English, or they pretended not to. Over the years, Beto's extensive experience as a driver taught him how to read people's thoughts through their facial expressions. Eventually, he realized that these men simply didn't want to engage with the other settlers. They were fed separately and taken to work elsewhere. Beto spent his first year as an apprentice, in the literal sense of the word. He spent entire days loading and unloading trucks and crates. But the meager food, excessive physical strain, and exhaustion took a toll on his body, and one morning he found himself unable to get up. He asked Ramiro to go to the owner. Shortly thereafter, Gil appeared in the barracks, shouting and waving his arms. Ramiro, who had become familiar with the foreign language, translated. "The owner is berating you. He says you're a weakling, and he paid a lot for you." Beto, gritting his teeth because of the excruciating pain in his back, said, "Ramiro, tell him to return this defective good. I would gladly return to my homeland." As the young man struggled with his role as a translator, Gil seemed to understand the message and demonstrated his disapproval with a clenched fist. However, the owner refrained from further tormenting the ailing worker. He muttered something and left, but Oria quickly arrived with a jar of a foul-smelling ointment. Using gestures, she showed him to turn onto his stomach. The woman applied the unpleasant concoction to his back, and he immediately felt relief. Oria placed the jar and gave instructions in her language. Ramiro translated. "She said you should apply it every hour. You can't be in pain here. You need to work. If you work well, you'll get food." Beto shivered with unpleasant associations. "It's an incredible regime. It reminds me of something unpleasant from our not-so-distant history." No one supported his comment, and Beto realized that his companions probably hadn't studied history in the same textbooks he had during his school years. The next day, Beto felt slightly better and headed to the warehouse. However, he was greeted by Mateo, the hulking guy who had welcomed him and Max on the first day. Mateo also preferred to speak in their native language but would insert English words when needed. He informed Beto that the owner had instructed him to help the women in the greenhouses for now. Beto didn't object and went to his new workplace. To his surprise, he found Max there. Or rather, Max rushed towards Beto with an exclamation. "Well, look who is here. You're still alive." The reunion brought joy to Beto, who asked, "As you can see, I didn't expect to find you here. I thought you'd be enjoying your freedom by now." Max scowled. "Of course, I could have gone on the run if I were on my own turf. But here, in this foreign land, I'd have nowhere to go and might stumble into an even bigger problem." Max looked unwell. His already gaunt face seemed even more sunken, and his eyes gleamed with a feverish fire. Beto didn't pry into Max's situation and simply asked, "Can you at least tell me your real name?" The man playfully winked. "I'm Alex, or Alejandro, if you prefer. If you need facts from my previous biography, I'll be honest, I've had 4 trips to some very remote places. If it weren't for falling into Jacinto's clutches, I'd probably still be lightening people's wallets." Mateo's shout interrupted their short conversation. He had disappeared briefly but suddenly reappeared as if he had sprung up from the ground. Max managed to whisper, "It's a good thing we've met. It'll be easier to break free together from here." For several months, Beto worked in the greenhouses and met Alejandro every day. Mateo and 2 other people monitored the work, but even such strict control didn't prevent the men from communicating. They began to devise an escape plan, and hope provided them with strength. One day, in passing, Alex whispered, "I have a rough idea of where we are. The borders of our country are quite close. If we could manage to hijack a car, we might be able to escape." But Beto considered this plan unattainable because only hired workers were allowed near the garage. Getting in there with Alejandro was almost certainly impossible. However, fate had an unexpected gift in store for them. It became known that the driver who Gil relentlessly overworked had been unable to bear the heavy labor. This unfortunate incident occurred on a Sunday, just as Gil and his wife were taking their products to the market. It's worth noting that there was always a long line at their stall because their natural products were in high demand. Sometimes, Gil needed to take 2 cars to the market when there was a lot of merchandise. Such was the case on that Sunday. Gil took the wheel of one car, leaving the other fully loaded but without a driver. Beto, who had just delivered bags of fertilizer from the warehouse to the greenhouses, noticed the family's distress and offered his help. "If you're having trouble, Mr. Gil, I can deliver the goods to the market for you." To his surprise, Beto realized that the curly-headed man understood English without needing a translator. But given his current situation, Beto didn't feel it was his place to inquire about communication nuances and took the driver's seat to drive the car. He delivered and unloaded the goods and was prepared to stay in the vehicle as instructed by Gil. There was nothing else he could do, and he complied. After that incident, the owner started exploiting him every Sunday. However, Gil's friendly attitude quickly turned hostile. One day, he even openly struck Beto in the face. This happened when a lady in a straw hat distracted him. He couldn't make out what the woman asked because they spoke in their shared native language, but Gil noticed and pounced on him while the lady disappeared. Beto endured humiliation and beatings only for one purpose: to break free. Now he rarely saw Alex, but he had a trusted ally in Ramiro, who regularly visited the greenhouse operation to convey the necessary information to Max. In the nearly polished escape plan, there was one vulnerable point. Every evening, Gil not only took the car keys, but also locked the garage with 2 additional locks. Breaking into the metal structure through any other means was impossible, but Beto was accustomed to overcoming difficulties because they shaped his character. An inner voice reassured him that his involuntary captivity would soon come to an end. This thought was prompted by a strange question from Ramiro. "Beto, when we get free, will you go back home?" The man was taken aback. "Of course. And you'll find your family as well." Tears welled up in the young man's eyes. "I won't find them. I don't know where to look for them. Besides, my family wasn't in that camp. And how did you end up there? I don't even know myself. Probably hitched a ride or something. That's why I thought it was better for me to stay here. The food might be bad, but at least you can eat every day." The confession from the young man turned everything around in the mind of Beto. He didn't promise him anything, but he thought he would take care of him. A chance came about entirely unexpectedly. Oria fell ill. Beto saw an ambulance arrive, and the landlady got into it and drove away. By evening, Gil, feeling liberated, brought 2 painted women to the homestead. Later, some other guests arrived, and the party started. To be honest, Beto could never have imagined that the owner was capable of such things. During his entire time here, he had never seen outsiders. By nightfall, everyone was thoroughly inebriated. Beto anxiously kept an eye on the cars. Max, or rather, Alex, approached him. His old nickname had long been forgotten. "Are you thinking about the same thing as me?" "Yes, I believe that we won't have any other opportunities." "When?" "We need to wait until they fall asleep." You should think about the direction once again. All right, make sure to tell Ramiro. Yes, definitely. We'll meet at 2 in the morning. He returned to his barracks and needed to act as naturally as possible so that nobody would suspect anything. Beto lay down, not fearing that he might fall asleep, despite the overwhelming exhaustion. His entire body trembled. According to Alex's calculations, they should have reached the border in less than an hour. The most important thing was to avoid anyone trying to stop them. Alex assured them that there was no settlement before the border, and they would pass through a small forest. The main thing was to get to their people, and from there, everything would be fine. Precisely at 2 in the morning, Beto stepped outside as if to use the restroom. Ramiro whispered that one car was unlocked. After 5 minutes, Ramiro appeared. Alex sat by the car's wheel. Well, ready to go? They silently got into the car. Beto felt for the wires and started the car. He drove out of the yard without turning on the lights. After a few seconds, Ramiro shouted. Someone turned the light on in the house. Now everything depended solely on Beto's skill. He drove at the maximum speed possible. The car shook and swayed. You could barely call these roads. Oddly enough, nobody was chasing them. Maybe they had fallen behind. After some desperate racing, Alex yelled, "Look, that little forest. They smuggle illegals through here." Beto barely had time to think that if they were smuggling illegals, then maybe the path was guarded. Suddenly, a person leaped onto the road from behind the bushes and pointed a gun at them. Beto swerved, and the person tumbled into the bushes. Almost immediately, they heard gunshots. He kept the accelerator pressed. Ahead, there were some posts. Without slowing down, Beto passed through them and yelled, "Alex, Ramiro, we made it." Ramiro immediately said, "Alex won't respond to us anymore." Beto looked at the seat next to him and understood why Alex wouldn't respond. He stared ahead with vacant eyes, and the entire seat was covered in blood. Damn it! They had already driven about 10 kilometers and even hit some asphalt roads when they heard a loudspeaker behind them. They were ordered to stop, commanded in clear English. Beto saw a barrier of cars ahead and stopped. People in uniforms rushed towards them and ordered them to the ground. "We're on your side. We were held in slavery." One of the uniformed individuals whistled and said, "This is getting interesting. Lately, such information has been surfacing more frequently. Get in the car, we'll figure this out." Ramiro and Beto helped them to their feet, placed them in the car with bars, and the car set off. Beto leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. Is this really happening? Has it finally ended? He felt so sorry for Alex, a young guy who hadn't lived at all. We went through prison, Jacinto, and now slavery. Eugenia was bustling around the kitchen. They had received their salaries yesterday, and she and Valeriana had gone to the store, purchasing groceries according to a strict list. Now she was distributing them, and at the same time, she and Valeriana were discussing what and when to cook so they wouldn't repeat meals and make the groceries last as long as possible. Valeriana was recording everything, so the person cooking would just check the numbers and get to work. This system helped them survive and even save a bit of money. Eugenia glanced at her daughter. Valeriana seemed strange today, as if she were talking to someone else, her thoughts distant. "Daughter, is everything okay with you?" Valeriana startled. "No, Mom. Why would you think that?" "Well, you've been lost in thought all the time." The girl put down her notepad and pen, sighing. "No one can't hide anything from you, Mom." Eugenia sat down next to her. "Valeriana, I'm your mom, and you're my child. Isn't that normal? Come on, spill it. What's happened?" The woman was nervous. Their family had enough troubles. Could something have happened to her daughter too? Valeriana began to speak. "You know, Mom, when I was in college, there was this guy, Sancho. He's 1 year older than me. We started dating, and then I left, and, of course, I didn't leave him any contact information. I thought we weren't right for each other. Why burden him with my problems? Eugenia sighed, sensing where this was heading. Valeriana continued. But he was stubborn. He was searching for me and found me. And? Valeriana looked worriedly at her mother. Mom, he wants us to get married, you know? He wants to come over and meet you. Eugenia smiled. Why are you afraid? Mom, I don't know. What if he sees that we live poorly and doesn't want to see me anymore? Eugenia sighed. And you? Will you want to see him after that? Valeriana hesitated. No, of course not. Do you think I should give it a try? Call your Sancho, I'll prepare the dough and clean up the living room. You prepare the filling. And in the evening, around 8 o'clock, let him come. The boys will be here, so they can meet everyone right away. Valeriana blushed. Mom, for some reason, I'm so nervous. Eugenia hugged her tightly. It's okay, my dear. Mom, what about Dad? We'll find Dad, I'm sure of it. In the evening, everyone in the house was in high spirits. Even Basilio and Pedro behaved decently, trying not to shout or fight. It had been a long time since the atmosphere had been so cheerful. Sancho turned out to be a tall, athletic-looking young man. Eugenia liked him, he had a completely open look. He gave Eugenia a bouquet of flowers and Valeriana a cake. Eugenia was nearly moved to tears. Beto always gave her flowers on all occasions when they had money, and even when they didn't, for more than 4 years, she hadn't received any. Come in, Sancho, and meet my family. Sancho looked around, surprised, at Basilio, Melesio, and Pedro. Then he turned to Valeriana. You didn't tell me you have 3 brothers, that's wonderful. I'm an only child, and I really missed having a sibling to play with. Melesio, who had been looking at the guests tensely, smiled in relief. Well, if there's one thing we know how to do, it's play, he said, casting a quick glance at the twins. The evening went wonderfully. As Sancho said his goodbyes, he asked Eugenia, I'd like to know if I can come with my father. It's the proper thing to do, I guess. Eugenia smiled. Yes, Sancho, you can. Let's say this Sunday. The thought that they had no money for a wedding crossed the woman's mind. But her daughter was so happy. Eugenia would come up with something. She had learned to find solutions in any situation and would do so again. Oh, if only Beto were with us. When the young man left, Eugenia asked her daughter. Valeriana, Sancho mentioned with his father. What about his mother? Oh, his mother passed away. Just 3 years ago. That's unfortunate. The time until Sunday passed quicker than she thought. She left work at the salon a bit early, promising to return after taking care of things at home. She began setting the table, even though it meant spending money and stretching what little they had. But for now, Eugenia tried not to think about it. When she asked Valeriana where her father worked, Valeriana shrugged. Mom, I don't know. Sancho doesn't talk much about him, and I didn't ask. I'm marrying Sancho, not his father. They were finishing setting the table when the doorbell rang. Valeriana rushed to answer it, but Eugenia froze. The television was showing footage of the arrest of criminals who had crossed the border. She might have ignored it if not for the news broadcaster's words. The detainees claimed they were held in captivity in a neighboring country. Then the broadcast showed the actual arrest, and the woman suddenly screamed, Beto! And promptly collapsed to the floor. Valeriana rushed in from the hallway, and the boys came running from their rooms. Mom, what's wrong with you? Eugenia saw Sancho and his father. Is that you? Just in time. Sancho's father turned out to be that major. Eugenia had been upset with him for his inaction, but now she was happy with how things had turned out. The chief, Sancho's father, would certainly help them now. One of the detainees looked like Beto, almost for sure. Eugenia was convinced it was him. After a while, they were all sitting at the table. The wedding discussion had faded into the background. Valeriana was pacing the room, and Eugenia stared into the distance. Everyone was anxiously waiting while Melesio and Sancho did something on the computer. Antonio Santos was waiting too. Finally, Melesio exclaimed, "Found it!" He turned the monitor towards them, and they watched footage on the screen. Eugenia saw her husband on a TV show. Everyone watched as the detainees appeared on screen. Melesio paused the broadcast and zoomed in on the photo. Valeriana whispered, "Dad." Eugenia cried in silence. They all fell silent for a while. Finally, Eugenia turned to Sancho's father. "Tell me, what should I do? I need to go there." He shook his head. "No one will let you through, it's a border zone. On the other hand, if the claims of slavery are confirmed, he will be transferred. You know what? Stay in touch, and I'll head to work. I'll review all the documents and get in touch with colleagues." Eugenia nodded. "I'll still go, but I'll wait for you to tell me something." A day passed, then a second. Eugenia couldn't sit still. She longed to be with Beto, but she knew he was far away. What if he had been moved somewhere else? She would arrive, but he wouldn't be there. Antonio remained silent. She called him several times, but each time he answered, "We need to wait a little longer until we have more information." Eugenia understood one thing: she needed to do something. During these days, the boys were well behaved and watched their mother with concern. Antonio hung up. Well, that's it. Ignacio was taken. Now the only thing left is to untangle the whole mess. The major knew that the other enslaved hostages had been released too. The authorities couldn't avoid freeing them. They had also taken an additional 15 people from Gill's Hamlet. The news was filled with footage of their release, and newspapers were filled with headlines. The phone started vibrating on the table, and it was Eugenia. "Antonio, what's happening? It's been 2 weeks, and the television is saying, who knows what? Where is my husband? Where should I go?" The chief looked at his watch. "You don't need to go anywhere." "No, I'm not going to listen to you anymore. I'm leaving right now. I'm coming over to your place right now." Eugenia froze. Has something happened? Has something happened to Beto? Please don't worry. Nothing happened. I'll be there soon. The chief couldn't tell her anything because Beto himself had asked him not to. They had talked on the phone recently, and in a few hours, the man would be home. On his way, Antonio picked up his son. "Sancho, you need to come with me. Maybe you and Valeriana can hold her mother back. She's packing her suitcases." Ramiro greedily looked at the passing scenery out the window. It was so interesting, the forests, villages, and small towns. Somewhere among them, his parents might live. It would be amazing to find out. Of course, he understood that too much time had passed. He didn't remember anyone, and he had changed himself. Ramiro shifted his gaze to Beto. Just 2 days ago, Ramiro had no idea what he would do next. They had told him that they would help in some way. But Ramiro understood that help was not a guarantee. Then Beto approached him. "Well, Ramiro, any plans?" The young man shrugged. "I don't know. I've never lived just like that. Alone." Beto saw that Ramiro was confused and downcast, so he put his hands on his shoulders. "You know what, Ramiro? You're coming with me. I'll help you get settled, and I have a big, close-knit family. We won't let you disappear. My son is a little younger than you'll be. So don't feel down." At first, Ramiro was happy, but then he thought, why would he be a burden to someone else? Just getting in the way. He decided that he would stay for a couple of days and then leave. However, he didn't tell Beto anything. Eugenia was indeed in a frenzy at home. A bag stood in the middle of the room, and she was throwing things into it. Melesio followed her around. "Mom, where are you going? Don't you understand? Don't you understand, Melesio? Something happened to Dad. 2 weeks. I can't reach him for 2 weeks. What if he's forgotten everything? What if he's still asleep? What if he doesn't know where to go? Mom, don't talk nonsense." Antonio would have said something. "He's not saying anything. It's like he's hiding something from me. And you, Valeriana, could ask him more directly." "Mom." Melesio couldn't hold back. "What are you saying? You're scaring the kids." Eugenia sat on the couch and burst into tears. She was so tired. Tired of waiting? Tired of the unknown? So, what should I do? The doorbell rang, and Valeriana rushed to open it. Antonio and Sancho entered the room. "Eugenia, why don't you listen to me? How much longer? How much longer do I have to listen to you?" She raised her tear-filled eyes to the man. "You're not telling me anything sensible. I'm going to find out everything for myself. You don't need to go anywhere." Eugenia jumped up. "Enough. I don't want to listen to you anymore." She began to pace the room again. "Eugenia." The woman turned slowly towards the door. Beto was standing in the doorway, thin and looking older, but her dear Beto. She rushed towards him, screaming, and their children swarmed around him. For the first time in a very long while, Beto cried. Ramiro stood slightly apart to not get in their way. He stood there, tears welling up. Valeriana was the first to notice the boy in the dark hallway. She stared at him in surprise and then exclaimed, "How is this possible?" Beto noticed his daughter's confusion. Hugging Eugenia tightly, he said, "Meet Ramiro. We were together there. Ramiro has no one." Eugenia, the hospitable host, composed herself and said, "Ramiro, please come in." But then her smile faded. Beto grew concerned. "Why are you all looking at him as if he were a ghost?" Beto didn't understand, and the children were staring at Ramiro too, their mouths agape. Valeriana was the first to snap out of it. She turned to Antonio and Sancho and said, "Ramiro, come here, you'll understand everything in a moment." Ramiro hesitantly stepped forward and froze. Another boy was in the room, looking at him, and Ramiro realized that they were mere reflections of each other. Only their hair was cut differently, and their clothes. He turned to Beto, as if seeking support, and then everyone looked at Antonio. He sat there, pale, clutching his chest. "This can't be." Valeriana rushed for the sedative, and Eugenia helped Antonio onto the couch, unbuttoning the top buttons of his shirt. They all knew that only Antonio could explain. Sancho was also pale. He had no idea what to think. When the major had caught his breath, he started talking. "Mom has been looking for you all her life. I'm a cop, so I stopped hoping that you were alive a year after your disappearance." Sancho slumped into a chair. "Dad, are you saying that, Ramiro?" "Yes, Sancho, it seems so." "So, you do have a family after all?" Antonio continued. "When you were 3, we were walking in the park. I went to buy some drinks, and you both were always running away from your mother. While she was catching you, your brother would run off. At some point, she turned around, and Esther, you were called Esther, Ramiro, and Esther was gone. I was already working for the police then, and I couldn't do anything. Mom blamed herself all her life. She blamed herself and quietly went mad. She couldn't take it anymore. Her heart stopped beating 3 years ago, consumed by grief." The room fell silent. Ramiro couldn't even speak. "So, that means he actually has a family?" Antonio continued. 3 years later, we moved to another city, but I kept trying to do something. But it was so hard for her there. She spent almost all her time in that park. I was afraid of losing her too. Antonio got up, walked over to Ramiro, and stared at him for a long time. Then he hugged him tightly. A second later, Sancho joined them. They stood there, the three of them hugging, all three crying. Antonio turned to Eugenio and Beto. "Forgive us, we will pick up our son and leave. There's a lot to do now, restore documents and reopen the investigation." Eugenia nodded, and the major held Ramiro's hand firmly. "Well, son? Ready to go home?" 6 months passed. "Mom, Dad, how do I look to you?" Beto smiled. "You're the most beautiful girl in the world to me." Eugenia stood, snuggled up to her husband, and admired her daughter too. Valeriana twirled in her wedding dress. Beto received significant compensation, and he said that his daughter would have a lavish and real wedding. Eleonora burst into the room as Valeriana's friend and witness at the wedding. "All your neighbors have gathered downstairs. They want to buy Valeriana out." Beto laughed. "Well, that's great. My daughter is worth a fortune." Valeriana became worried. "We need to call them and let them know." But Eleonora snorted. "They can figure it out themselves." Beto laughed. "Oh, don't worry. Ramiro can charm any crowd. They won't just let them through, they'll probably pay as well." For some reason, Eleonora's cheeks turned crimson immediately, which didn't escape Eugenia's keen gaze. She exchanged a knowing look with her husband, gently nudging him. "I have a feeling that there might be another wedding on the horizon." Eleonora overheard Eugenia's words and turned completely scarlet. It's uncertain how the conversation would have ended, but the boys rushed into the apartment. "They're here. They're here." Valeriana looked frightened, and Eugenia hugged her. "What's wrong?" "Oh, Mom, I don't know. Everything will be fine, don't worry." Ramiro's voice could be heard through the open windows. Now and then, the people in the yard burst into laughter. Valeriana relaxed a bit. Life is such a strange thing, after all. Ramiro had lived most of his life as someone unknown, and now she couldn't even imagine a time when Sancho didn't have a brother. He fit into their family as if he had never left. Sancho told them that they had visited the cemetery to visit their mother the next day. Ramiro cried for a long time there, kneeling at her grave. Ramiro was studying intensively to get his school diploma and immediately pursue further studies. Antonio managed to arrange it so that Ramiro would simply take the exams and receive his diploma. Valeriana and Sancho were trying to help him. In the hallway, a multitude of voices could be heard. Sancho entered the room in his suit, glanced at Valeriana, and exclaimed, "Wow, Valeriana! Why didn't you tell me you're this beautiful? Now I have to keep you in a burqa." She laughed. "No need for that. I have you." Ramiro chimed in immediately. "Actually, as twins, everything should be the same for both of us. Someone should be looking at me too." He turned around. "Where is my witness?" Eleonora rushed into the room to check if her makeup was still fine. She had spent 3 hours at the beauty salon today. She came out when Ramiro called her and looked at him sheepishly. "Hello." Ramiro whistled. "Wow. I have to agree, I wouldn't mind having such beauty looking at me forever." Eleonora blushed, and Ramiro gently took her hand. "Today, I'll be looking after the bride. It's my duty as a ranking officer. But I won't take my eyes off you either, so you won't run away." Eugenia listened to the registrar's words and thought about how unpredictable life was. Her husband paid for someone else's sins, and she paid for them too. But without all this, Ramiro would never have found his family, and Antonio would never have found his son. Everything is so interconnected. Who would have thought that Ramiro would cross paths with Beto, and Antonio and his wife would move to this city of all places? And Valeriana managed to meet not only the son of that same major but also Ramiro's father. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Eugenia looked up, wiped away her tears, and glanced at Melesio, who was there with his girlfriend today. Her little ones are starting to leave the nest. Beto hugged her. Don't be sad, my dear. Pedro and Basilio are still with us. And who knows? Maybe grandchildren will come along soon. Eugenia smiled. How do you know what I'm thinking? I know everything because I love you very much. And at that time, I was absolutely sure we'd meet again.